Hi everyone, it's Graham Hood here from Club Grubbery, and John and I have just completed a very lengthy interview. We were going to cut it into two parts, but you can decide where you want to cut it and watch it tomorrow or whatever. You can divide it up how you want to yourself. There's a lot of comprehensive information in it about what's going on in the sky. Now, John and I have brought to you various perspectives now. I've given you my perspective from what I know. We've interviewed Dane Wigington, which for me left more unanswered questions than answered ones. And today we interviewed Jim Lee, who's the founder of ClimateViewer.com. And it's a very extensive website into what's going on in the sky. Now, you're going to get two sides of the story in this interview. And for those of you who are focused on this, focused on clouds and focused on what's happening with airplanes and everything, this is your opportunity to decide for yourself based on two lots of information. We're not telling you what to think. We're only telling you both sides of the story. Now, I, for one, find Jim Lee's evidence compelling, and I can't argue with any of it, to be honest with you, and that's after 53 years of being a pilot. I think what he says is true. It's backed up with proper science. There's not a lot of guesswork in it, and he's happy to be wrong, as am I. But I just want to say this before you watch the video. John and I came into this fight to keep borders open, end mandates, get everyone their jobs back with compensation, protect kids from being vaccinated compulsorily, and have a Royal Commission or better. We're staying in that mission. We're staying on that lane. We're getting some traction in there. And for me, this is over when John Lader gets his job back. Because if he gets his job back after the outspoken way that he's been and the things he's done for other people, then everyone's in a better place. So that's where we're putting our focus back again. I will not be discussing chemtrails anymore. That's it. I've given you the very best of what I can. I've spent months researching this. It's taken me off the game that I want to be in, but it is what it is. You decide. I'm not against you either way. Don't shoot me. I'm only the piano player. I'm giving you both sides of the story. So I trust you enjoy this interview with Jim Lee, and that you watch the other one that we did with him where he was also interviewed by Debunking, which was a fantastic interview. The science is there to back it up. The evidence is there to back it up, and you be the judge. And from here on in, it's going to be our mission and our mission only. God bless you all, and thanks for watching. Bye for now. Well, hi, everybody. It's Club Grubbery time again. Welcome back to the program. It's Tuesday, the 26th of March here in Australia. And we're going to cover off on a topic that needs to be discussed and put to bed so John and I can get back to the work that we're trying desperately to do, and that's end mandates and stop this COVID madness and get some investigating done to uncover who's really behind all this. But John, we've got a guy who's really gone out on a limb, and he's copped flack for it as well. But Del Bigtree interviewed Jim Lee a little while back, and we've shared that video on our platform, and it really has changed a lot of thinking. I've had people contact me about this issue and said, "Wow, that interview has really got me thinking." So, and that's what we want to do here in Club Grubbery. So, Jim Lee from ClimateViewer.com. So glad to have you on board, mate. I know you've got a screaming migraine headache, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Hey man, nothing could stop me from doing this.
Good on you, mate. Now, I just want to open with a couple of comments. During my career, 36,000 flying hours, 53 years, 32 years a captain on a Boeing 737-800 and other variants, I have put 100,000 tons, that's 100,000 tons of jet fuel, burnt jet fuel into the upper atmosphere. And I've always felt quite guilty about that. I always felt that we fly too much. I know this sounds crazy coming from a pilot because my job, was obviously dedicated to getting people from A to B. But when the airfares got so cheap, when an airfare from one capital city to another was cheaper than a cab fare to the airport or the parking costs of your car at the airport, it was ridiculous. People were flying for no real reason. It was just like, hey, let's go to Melbourne and watch the football. And so every time I flew an aeroplane, say from Brisbane to Perth, I'd leave about 10 to 12 tons of burnt kerosene in the upper atmosphere. And that used to really bug me. And all the debate about chemtrails and weather modification is based largely on the fact that there are powers in play, globalist powers in play, who are trying desperately to control the weather, because he who controls the weather controls the world. There's no doubt about the fact that weather modification is going on. It's sinister, it's immoral, and it should not be happening. The Canadian government have been recently in talks with Bill Gates about putting a solar blanket over the Arctic Circle. Now, I don't know what
Yeah,
gives one government.
that's called marine cloud brightening.
There you
Marine
go.
cloud brightening is shooting sea salt into marine stratocumulus to make them whiter and reflect sunlight.
Now, that what can possibly go wrong?
You
We
can look it up on Marine Cloud Brightening Project. It's MCBP mcbproject.org, I'm pretty sure.
So it's vitally important that we understand what's going on so we can apply ourselves logically to fix the problem. But there has been a lot of debate about chemtrails and contrails and the whys and wherefores, and I've tried everything I can to explain it with my experience. And we even interviewed Dane Wigington from Geoengineering watch.org. It was an interview that had to go up because we had to prove that we're willing to look at both sides of the story. But I have to tell you that that interview left me with more questions than answers. There was about 30 minutes that we agreed to edit out because it did get a little bit heated and it wasn't going anywhere because I couldn't get a point across to Dane and he just wouldn't let me get it out there. Now, I understand he's passionate about the things he talks about, but so am I. I mean, I have been up there for half a century. I know how the upper atmosphere works. I know how a jet engine works. I know how condensation trails are formed. I've had to pass exams on weather and meteorology myself to keep current every year. So, and I am a man who prides my integrity. There have been times when I've been misled. I know that. But the truth is the truth. And my truth is based on 53 years experience. So to talk about these issues and others, I've asked Jim Lee to come onto the program to help settle some of you who are really concerned, because maybe what Jim is about to share and maybe what I've been saying over the previous episodes needs to be heard, because a lot of people are deeply concerned to the point of total distraction over these things. And you need to have knowledge in order to weigh up and be discerning about what you believe and what you don't. So we're presenting both sides of the story. Jim Lee, welcome. And you have seen the video that I put out. We've shared your video with Del Bigtree. As I said, a lot of very, very strong chemtrail believers have turned the corner as a result of this because they've actually looked at the other side and seen that maybe there is more to this than meets the eye. So welcome again. And tell us from your perspective, because let's unpack what you've been doing. How did you get into this? How long have you been doing it? And let's lead into where we are now.
So I really started, I had already been, just personally researching the topic of geoengineering before the birth of my daughter in 2009. But when she was born, it went from just playing video games every day, and now I got a daddy up. And by the way, maybe I should actually say something about some of the stuff that I learned. So from 2009 to around 2013, I was debating Ken Caldera, David Key, John Latham, Stephen Salter. These are all geoengineers. I was debating them in their own forum, explaining how crazy what they were proposing was and why. Um, and I also was, breaking down how HARP really works. There was a lot of misconceptions about HARP, that people were calling NEXRAD radars, Doppler radars, basically HARP rings. And I was like, but there's only one HARP. So, there were a lot of things that I was trying to unpack for people that I had learned. And then the chemtrail people came for me. And honestly, like I had been studying cloud seeding, stratospheric aerosol injection, and let's say artificial cloud creation, so artificial ion cloud creation with sounding rockets and using ionospheric heaters to modify the ionosphere. So I was deep in literature. I understood terminology, all these things, I was talking about geoengineering, but everybody kept just focusing on the clouds. That's all I'd ever hear about. Yeah, Jim, but when are you going to talk about the chemtrails, you know? And I'm like, but this is happening in your neighborhood. If you want to stop weather modification, here's the people doing it, you know. It's North American Western NOC, NAWC, North American Weather Consultants, you know, Weather Modification Incorporated. They're, you know, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, the people you pay your water bill to in Sacramento are paying them to modify the weather. Things like this. And they would say, but chemtrails. And I was like, okay, I guess I can't avoid this. Like, people are going to continue to just spam chemtrails in my comments until I actually get to the bottom of this. Okay, what's the problem? And they say aluminum and barium. They're spraying us like bugs with aluminum and barium. So, obviously, just being a logical person, let's try to prove or disprove this so I can move on with my life and get back to trying to stop the people that want to block out the sun because climate change. And lo and behold, it took less than, you know, 3 or 4 weeks of reading stuff to realize that every single chemical that everybody was talking about was already in the jet fuel or the additives put in the jet fuel. So then, you know, I really, you know, it kind of morphed from that to this. There's no other way to put it. It became a semantic game. Everything was about semantics. So to this day, the the most common answer I get, no matter how many times I try to explain this as simply as possible, is a contrail is a short line that disappears quickly. A chemtrail does not disappear and blocks out the sun. And I think both are an oversimplification of the terms. So I've tried to, you know, help people better discern what these words mean and why they mean different things to different people based on what they've previously been indoctrinated to believe on the internet by people who don't science much. And I'm no scientist either. I'm not going to sit here and show you my PhD because I got my PhD at Tractor Supply Company. It's called a post hole digger.
Yeah.
You know, I learn, you know, I am a student for the rest of my life. And sometimes I'm the student and sometimes I'm the teacher. And I know when to shut up when there's time, you know, that I'm going to learn. And sometimes I'm barking at the person while I'm doing it. But sometimes those are the best, you know, learning experiences is to have a good argument with somebody who thinks the exact opposite. So I confronted the debunkers, you know, regularly. And you know what? I learned a lot from them. Some of which I still, you know, maintain they're wrong on. So now I can have a conversation with the public about this topic, or I can have a conversation with the head of the Federal Aviation Administration's Aviation Climate Change Research Initiative and use all the exact terminology that he's familiar with and get him to admit that everything I'm saying is true. So if he's agreeing with me, if I go and I speak to the Environmental Protection Agency, I testified, you know, under oath on our C-SPAN here in America, went up to Washington, D.C. Before I went there, I took my, you know, I wrote out, they told me I had 10 minutes to speak. So I wrote it all out and I gave it to the debunkers. I said, here you go. You guys are trolls. You're professional trolls. Tell me one sentence in this, you know, statement I'm about to make. Is any of this not factual? Where are the errors? They could do nothing but ad hominem, you know, personal attacks, motivational attacks. Oh, you're doing this for the money because you did a GoFundMe to go up there. I took a train, by the way, when I went up to DC, as not to be a hypocrite. I don't like flying. That's just me personally. I get sick when I'm flying. Aerotoxic syndrome. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. But basically, you know, the cabin air does have siphons inside the, you know, high bypass section of the wings, and
Yep.
sometimes engine oil smoke, even though it's in minute amounts, um, really negatively affect me. I went to Arizona because G. Edward Griffin flew me out to speak at Global Warming and Inconvenient Truth. On the way there, I got off the plane. I was running 102-degree temperature. The flight back, I actually got a little bit better over the 2 days that I was there. And then when I flew back, I had pneumonia for a month. When I flew out to the weather modification conference at the American Meteorological Society in 2018 in Austin, Texas, I was sick for 4 days straight. When I got back, I was sick for another 2 weeks. So I just don't fly anymore. And I don't know if that's just me being personally chemically sensitive or, you know, maybe it's just, all in my head. I don't believe so because when they x-rayed my lungs, they were like, no, it's not all in your head. That being said, it's been a painful process of, trying to negotiate the fine line between what is the reality of what we're seeing overhead and what are the intentions of people who are geoengineers to take advantage of pollution to turn it into geoengineering.
Yep.
And then finally, to be able to differentiate between what is the pollution that is visible pollution versus clandestine or rogue geoengineering, as it would be called. An intentional plan to take advantage of clouds or intentionally make clouds to cool the planet, because that agenda is real as well. And I'm going to show you all some surprises that weren't on the Big Tree Show when we get a little deeper into this. But that's kind of the arc of it. Like I was dragged kicking and screaming into this chemtrail debate. And a lot of people, have, including scientists, have reached out to me and are like, I believed contrails were just completely benign. You really changed my mind. And then longtime chemtrail, most famously, there was a guy who ran a website for chemtrails for 3 years. We had a 3-hour phone conversation because I could tell he was being genuine and wanted to know.
Yeah.
And every question I answered it honestly. And I said, "Now, what are you going to do about it? Like, are you going to look into this sort of stuff?" He says, like, "I need to, digest this." The next day when I called him back, he just texted me back. He's like, "I'm actually done." And I checked his website. He deleted everything. And I was like, whoa, did not expect that. But that's the kind of, that's the kind of response you get when you realize that you've been parroting a lie for so long. It happened to me. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. So I was, one of those brainwashed individuals that just kind of took everything at face value. And I was scared that a comet was going to kill us because I heard some pseudoscience online. And afterwards, I had to ask myself, how did this happen? Like, how did I get so scared that the comet Elenin was going to go between the Earth and the sun, and there was going to be this solar kill shot and all those, fear porn videos? And I realized that it was through the use of slave speak, through the use of high level descriptors, and throw in just a dash of truth and then twist that. And that's how, I got sucked in. And I said, you know what? I'm going back and I'm reading articles that I wrote, and I'm going, I was such a fool. I felt like such a fool that I deleted 300 articles I had written. I said, I'm going to start from scratch. And this time I'm going to use my whole brain and not just jump to conclusions, admit what I don't know, and be honest with people about it. Here's what I know, here's what I don't know, but I want you to know that I don't know. And that's where we're going to go with this. That's kind of been my operating, practice since that point. And, a lot of people don't, no matter how much truth you shove in their face, they're never going to, think about it critically. They're not going to become self-aware, like rise above, have a higher consciousness about it. They're just going to believe that you're part of you have a personal phone line that goes from Graham Hood's office, right before he gets on a plane, to David Keith, geoengineer himself, who tells you, hey, today I need you to spray over Adelaide and, block out the sun from between this time and this time. People honestly believe this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's highly destructive. But more importantly, for anybody who plans on doing something about this as either a visual problem that you just don't like seeing it, or as a pollution problem because it is highly toxic and we do have acid rain and toxic nanoparticles of metal building up in the atmosphere, whitening the sky. It is all bad. Um, and of course, to what you said earlier, a lot of people responded to me. What are you, part of the AOC, like, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez / World Economic Forum? People shouldn't fly. I literally got an article like just before I went on the air today that it was a CNN article about flight passports, like they'll be called carbon passports, that people need to fly less.
Mm.
So there's a lot to unpack there. But yeah, I was dragged into this and now I'm here. So people have to deal with it. And I'm going to tell the truth, not my truth, until somebody can prove me better. And I've had an open invitation for going on a decade to anyone, and I mean that with two underlines, anyone that wants to debate me on this topic. If you think that you know a lot about this topic, if you are the top scientist on contrail science, or you're the top debunker, or you're just a really strong chemtrail believer who thinks they know more than me, I have an open invitation. You can come on all of my channels simultaneously live, and we'll have a frank discussion about it.
The argument I want to put forward, and I want to bring John into this too, in so many different agendas that we've been walking through, John, we have people come to us and say, you really got to investigate this. This is true, da, 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 da. And then when we start investigating, we realize that what they want us to investigate is not actually true. And in the movie, The Dimming, there were a lot of comments made in the first half of that documentary that were patently not right. It was misinformation. The fact that a high bypass jet engine it's almost impossible for it to produce a condensation trail. It is the high bypass engine is a condensation trail manufacturing machine as a byproduct of jet thrust, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And then there was the argument about the World War II bombers and how they were doing weather modification in 1943, 44. And every time I presented to Dane Wigington a photograph that showed that these trails were largely coming off propeller tips and then going back with some great photos, it was just, he wasn't interested. He didn't want to know about it. And the whole reason I'm talking about what happened back in World War II was because when someone comes out and says they're using World War II bombers as the start of the weather modification program, and we know that that's patently untrue, then how can we trust all the other information that we get? That's the big problem. We've had people say, oh, this person's a Freemason, or that person's this or that. And then when we find out that they're not, and I know for a fact that I've been called a Freemason and I've said that I'm not because I know that I'm not, then how can I trust the information that comes from their mouths about the other issues? And that's where the interview left me with Dane Wigington. It left me, and I know it did with you, John, because there's a bit that we had to cut out, but it left me and you with questions that he couldn't answer. It's crazy, isn't it, mate?
Yeah, well, he lost me when he started to indicate that these bombers were taking off in the thousands and were spraying chemicals in World War II. I mean, I don't know. I sort of turned off at that point. I think the problem is there's an absence of truth everywhere. It doesn't matter whether it's in the actual full-blown media or whether it's on social media, whether it's with politicians. There's a mistrust globally. People don't believe in our statesmen anymore. You can't take for granted at something. There's an absence of balance on programming, and that's why here we just try and keep it very simple. We try and keep it honest, and we're not trying to hide anything. So yeah, look, I think it is mistrust, Hoodie. There's no doubt about it, and they're preying on it. I think people are so upset, so traumatized by what's gone on with episodes like COVID that they think the world's imploding in other areas where it's not, and it's unfortunate. And it'd be good to get this interview out so that people can actually have a look. We're not saying you've got to believe what we're saying, but you owe it to yourself to actually investigate for yourself as to what's going on. So it's we're no better than anyone else if you're not going to look at this information critically yourself.
Yeah, and it really brought it back to the fore with me when I saw a lot of people were forming prayer circles to pray for aircraft to collide and come down. And if they only knew that the aircraft they're praying to collapse into the ground and to fly into each other and crash were carrying hundreds of people just like them if they were going on their holidays. Now, when it gets to that stage, we've got to say what we've got to say and leave it up to critical thinkers to make up their own mind. We're not trying to guide you down either path, but we've got to share what the truth as we know it and the facts that we know it. And then logical critical thinkers will weigh both those things up and get on with it. So, Jim, the floor's yours, mate. Based on the fact of what we just said, people praying for commercial aircraft to collide in the sky. I want you to, if you can, start from that basis in the beginning.
I end every video that I make, whether it's on YouTube. Yeah, I just recently started multi-streaming. So I'm on Rumble and BitChute and Odyssey and all that stuff. But I end every video the same way, and I tell people attack ideas, not people. And I do not censor any comments anywhere on any of my social platforms. The only comments I delete are threats of violence. And the majority of those threats of violence have been hardcore chemtrail believers saying things like we should shoot down planes. Now, lucky for us, morons have a hard time picking up, anti-aircraft missiles. So thank you, God, for that you're not allowing morons to pick up anti-air missiles. Amen. But yes, I censor those comments because I don't believe that, whether it's physical violence, threats of violence. A lot of people say when I call Dane Wigington an idiot that I attacked him. No, you got it all wrong. You cannot attack a person with words. I don't give a damn what people say about hate speech or any of that stuff. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And if you don't have thick skin, frankly, your ass does not belong on the internet. Plain and simple. Yeah. And you certainly wouldn't be sitting in this seat right now, which is what I've done a lot of times. I get these very vocal advocates that say that I'm a shill, I'm an actor, how much are they paying you? And I say, all right, well, that's real easy to say, say in the comment section. Why don't you get on camera, put your face, your name, and say it to my face with your chest, and we'll have a conversation about it. But no, generally speaking, these people are cowards. Most of the time, they're not even real accounts. So it usually brings me back around to the whole pollution, privacy, propaganda wheelhouse. Who benefits from a chemtrail conspiracy? The airline industry. Why does the airline industry benefit from a chemtrail conspiracy? Because if you're telling everybody that planes cannot create contrails and that all of the clouds you're seeing are chemtrails and they're secret government programs and they're CIA planes painted to look like Delta Airlines, then you can never hold Delta Airlines accountable for poisoning people with exhaust fumes that have been raining down on you forever. So
Yeah.
I think of this from a propaganda. If I were the airline industry, which was sued for blocking out sunlight in Illinois and New Jersey in 1970 and skirted regulation by the skin of their teeth, because John Volt came in and from the Secretary of Transportation and said, let's settle this out of the court. The airlines will redesign their, burner cans, their combustors to reduce particulate emission, and that'll reduce the amount of clouds that we're creating. Because believe it or not, whether you like it or not, I have newspaper articles going back to 1948 of contrails spreading out, creating cirrus clouds, blocking out the sun. In 1958 with Palm Springs, California. It's in the Del Bigtree interview. If you didn't see it, they were saying that, basically their entire tourist industry was being ruined by clouds from planes. And the Air Force basically told them, look, you're at the intersection of the West Coast of America. So either move the city or live with the trails. So from 1948 to about 1960, they were just referred to as vapor trails. When they were sued by Illinois and New Jersey, they referred to it as smoke pollution of the sky. I'm sure that, Graham, you're old enough to probably remember this term. Have you ever heard of black belch?
No, I
Have you
haven't.
ever heard it? Okay, well, black belch was a common complaint about soot emissions, especially like if you watch any video of like a B-52 bomber taking off on the runway, it's just massive trails of black powder coming out the back of those engines.
Yeah.
That is what creates persistent contrails. That soot, that black belch is what makes condensation trails turn into chemtrails. Whether you like it or not, if it weren't for soot emissions, there wouldn't be anything for the water to condense on. Yes, it might freeze on itself. That would be called homogeneous.
Yeah.
Because it's just one thing instead of heterogeneous, meaning many things. But whenever it's not homogeneous, then all you have is a couple ice crystals, and then you could actually believe what people are saying. They're just condensation trails. It's just water vapor. That's bull crap. That's absolute bull crap. That's hogwash. That's skirting the issue by saying it's just water vapor. Is it mostly water vapor? Yes, there's a lot of water produced every time you burn a gallon of freaking, or a liter of jet fuel. There's a lot of water produced from that. But what people aren't focusing on is I come from the cloud seeding weather modification research. Now I'm being forced to explain this stuff going on, and I'm going, with a high bypass, that would actually make more clouds because you're introducing more air into a compressed area, which is superseded with black carbon particles, which are filled with nanoparticles of metal, which has a graphene laminate on the outside of it, which means that basically heat plus pressure plus ionization cooked the outside of that soot to turn it into graphene, that sulfur dioxide mixed with water in the air to become sulfuric acid. We used to talk about acid rain a lot when I was a kid. We don't talk about that anymore. It's like we don't talk about anything real anymore. It's not global warming anymore. It's climate change. Why? Because it's more general. You can't point out the obvious flaws in climate and global warming ideology like urban heat islands and manufacturing of data and. We're not here to talk about climate change. We will be touching on it because the climate change people are the ones who want to take advantage of these clouds being made. Now, it was a common assumption among climate scientists that Persistent contrails, or another term, aviation-induced cloudiness, or contrail-induced cirrus clouds. This is the most commonly used one. Airplane-induced cloudiness, AIC, and CIC, contrail-induced cirrus. Meaning, if you think it's a chemtrail or it's a contrail, once it fans out, it is neither. It is now a cirrus cloud. Cirrus clouds are ice clouds. And when several different universities around the globe flew through those cirrus clouds to collect the cloud condensation nuclei, the ice nucleating particles at the center of each of those drops of water in those cirrus clouds, were 75% man-made metals. I testified to this in front of the EPA in 2015. They readily agree that no debunker on the planet, no scientist on the planet could prove me wrong, because guess what? I quoted so many different sources for this. So if we know for a fact that these are ice metal clouds made by planes, that is removing all of the slave speak, the high level descriptors from this.
Yep.
What do you think about that?
Look, I totally and utterly agree with it. It sums it all up beautifully. Yeah, back in 1952 in the UK, there were Winston Churchill had a lot of coal burning power stations in the middle of London. There was a big high pressure system come over the UK. It was a massive anticyclone, and as a result, that's right, pushed all that air down over the city of London, and the soot from the power stations went up, formed that with the nuclei that formed the fog, which killed about 20,000 people over 3 days. And
a lot of people never heard about this.
A lot
I'm
of
glad
people
you brought it up.
That's right. So we need to put this in perspective. And I'm old enough, Jim, to remember the acid rain debate. Acid rain back then was put down to the fact that power stations were releasing all these toxins into the atmosphere, which were being drawn up into cumulus clouds into the upper atmosphere and eventually coming down around the world as acid rain. And it was largely blamed on coal burning power stations back then, power stations that burned dirty coal. So the fact is, when you put water vapor, microscopic water vapor nuclei needs something to fasten to. And when you burn jet fuel in the ordinary passage of carrying people from A to B, you're producing the soot that produces those droplets into cloud. And it's as simple as that. But what scares me most is the fact that there is some sinister stuff going on in weather modification. And it's like we're being distracted. We're looking in the wrong place because we should be focusing on what's really going on. And so, John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you've summed it up beautifully. Of more concern to me is what's going on in the background. We know this weather modification is going on. I mean, Jim spoke about it earlier with even utility companies being involved in the States. Where does that lead to? Who's orchestrating all this? I mean, I bet it leads to a number of organisations that are up to no good.
Well, if you look at the history of it, I had a website called weathermodificationhistory.com. And because I had 3 websites, I got this bright idea to combine 2 of them into one. And I was going to put my maps on there. And now I'd only have one website, but so many people are demanding that I put weathermodificationhistory.com back together the way it was. I'm going to be moving it back. But so look for that in the future. Until then, you can go to climateviewer.com, click on pages, and click on weather modification history, interactive timeline, and newspaper vault. It's literally 2 pages. It'll teach you everything. The first page, the interactive timeline, starts at 1850 and goes to present. And if that isn't enough for you, because it's going to take you about 3 months to read it all, if you actually read it all, you can go to the newspaper section where we have over 850 newspaper articles going back to the 1850. I think the earliest we have is like 1889 or something like that. The point is, we moved from a place of what we called pluviculture from 1850 to 1945, let's say. In the early days of weather modification, pluviculture mainly used two methods of producing rainfall: the concussive method and chemical method. So concussive being like hail cannons, if you've ever heard of a hail cannon. Um, Hail cannons basically, they fire a very loud sound through a cone. That cone produces a pressure wave. The pressure wave should break up hailstones in clouds, so that you're actually breaking up the ice, making it into smaller things. Many farmers would use these to protect their crops. To this day, hail mitigation is a form of cloud seeding that is done chemically. But you still have your old school guys whose grandfather's grandfather passed it on to them, and they still operate hail cannons in America today. The other being chemical. And when you say chemical, that just means basically every single substance on the planet. Most people say chemtrails, chemical trails. Well, everything's a chemical. This freaking monitor, this microphone, everything is a chemical. So let's be a little more specific. They did everything from using electrified sand to hot air balloons with X-ray emitters on them, just like chest X-rays. They tried everything. So the age of pluviculture was basically try anything, see if it works. Most famously, the guy from Post Serial, CW Post, he actually got a check from the government, and basically went down to Texas and started firing actual cannonballs, rockets and mortars into the sky to try to make it rain. He didn't. But in 1946, when Irvin Langmuir, Bernard Vonnegut, and Vincent Schaefer invented cloud seeding at the GE science labs, that was a marked change. And they basically focused on two primary chemical ingredients: dry ice and silver iodide, or silver salt. Most people don't realize when they are throwing that word around that silver iodide is a silver salt. So it is salting the sky with silver. And by the way, silver is toxic. So that was invented in, December of 1946. And by November of 1947, they were already trying to steer hurricanes with cloud seeding. And that was called Project Cirrus. So very rapidly, we evolved from the old days of just try anything to now we have science on our side. And brought to you by GE, the United States Air Force, and, the Navy, and they're out there in the Gulf, out there in the Atlantic, trying to steer a tropical storm. Oh no, that tropical storm just turned into a hurricane, changed directions, and slammed into Savannah, Georgia, doing $3.2 million of damages. That's not a good start. A year or two later, Irving P. Crick invented the ground-based cloud seeding generator. And that generator that he created is still in use today. All along the Rocky Mountains in the United States, from October through March of every single year. In the winter, they do snowpack augmentation. And the idea is to create as much orographic cloud seeding, or artificial snow, as possible, so that in the springtime, when it melts, it fills the rivers up. This has drastic effects on weather downwind, despite all their claims that it doesn't. I have seen this in action myself. I'm demanding more transparency in the world of weather modification, because you're not going to stop it at this point. There's billions and trillions of dollars worldwide spent on weather modification projects. China alone is covering the entire Tibetan plateau in ground-based cloud seeding generators, to the tune of 100,000 of them. That is changing all of the world's weather. So while everybody's arguing about clouds, they're steering lightning bolts with laser beams. They are ionizing You guys have a couple groups down in Australia, as a matter of fact. Australian Rain Technologies has the Atlant system, which is a cloud ionizer. Basically uses electricity instead of using chemicals or concussive, sound waves. It uses negatively charged ions. So coronal discharges from electric little pyramids, they put ions up into the sky to basically make the dust and pollution that's already there stick to the water vapor. No added ingredients necessary. The United Arab Emirates Rainfall Enhancement Program is the largest in the world, where basically they're throwing all their oil money at turning the desert green and bringing as much rain as possible. Go watch all the TikTok videos of the floods in the desert going on today, where Linda Zhao, this Chinese lady, has come up with the idea of using nanoparticles of graphene oxide and silicon oxides to cloud seed. So we've gone way past silver iodide at this point. Not to mention, in the interim, cloud seeding went from a chemical for good to steering hurricanes less than 11 months after it was invented to, in 1969 through 1975, it was used as a weapon of war in Vietnam over Laos, and the Ho Chi Minh Trail, Operation Popeye, which was basically Henry Kissinger, the CIA, and the Weather Reconnaissance Division of the Air Force, and some U.S. Navy RF-4s. So it was C-130s and RF-4 Phantoms. That was used as a weapon of war all the way back then, and the world agreed to ban weather warfare in 1978. Nobody talks about hardly any of this stuff. All they focus on is they're spraying us like bugs, and I want this to stop because I know that some nefarious individual is doing this. And no, Jim, you paid shill actor, there's no way that that's natural in any way, shape, or form. It's not natural. Metal tubes breathing fire flying through the sky is not natural. Okay.
Mhm.
So we have to recognize that a lot of the arguments made on both sides, for and against,
Yeah.
are ridiculous
Mhm.
on their face. You were talking about the World War II thing. This is just the kind of logic train I use. Try to take a moment, a little walk in my shoes. If a B-17G Flying Fortress is going to go bomb some Nazis, do you think that they were trying to modify the weather, as Dane Wigington would claim? Or do you think that it was aerodynamic contrails created by a wingtip, by spinning propellers going through a very moist air mass, and that
Yep.
the guys who got shot out of the sky probably didn't want big freaking white lines pointing at the plane they were in?
Yep.
Because if I was sitting in that gunner seat on the bottom, the last damn thing I'd want is a big line behind me going, "Here I am, shoot at me." Which is why today we have contrail suppression systems on all of our stealth bombers, whether it's the B-2, the F-117, any of these, bombers, they have the ability to suppress contrails, or at least know where ice supersaturated regions are in the sky to avoid them, and have specially designed afterburner, foils to make sure that it's diverting heat away, because also heat-seeking missiles. That's one of the reasons they use chaff. Everybody's now saying they're spraying chaff all over us. You, Graham Hood, you're spraying plastic fibers and metal on everybody. That's how dumb it's gotten.
Yeah.
Now, is chaff bad for you? Yes, it's poisonous. I live less than 10 miles in my hometown from Shaw Air Force Base. Out in the state forest right next to it, in my same county, is the Shaw Air Force Base bombing range. So for those who don't know anything about chaff, or anything about how poisonous this stuff is, my wife's mother, my wife's grandmother, and her neighbor, and her neighbor's neighbor all of them had Alzheimer's. They were less than a half mile from the bombing range. I'm not saying that that's just, maybe it's just a big coincidence that everybody in the neighborhood, um, but whenever a plane comes down and then it drops a bomb, even if it's a fake bomb, an alert goes off in the pilot's cockpit. Dee, dee, dee. Has anybody watched Top Gun? If you have, you know what I'm talking about. So something, anti-aircraft missiles are locking onto you, bank hard, straight up, pop flares is chaff. And the flares are very hot to simulate the heat from an engine. And that's why they use them. They're not just popping them off to poison everybody. It is poisonous. It is toxic. But to hear people saying really stupid things like commercial airplanes are using chaff, or the military's just spraying chaff everywhere. The military is always going to do exercises. Anything the military does is almost always involving toxic chemicals. Look at the Camp Lejeune lawsuits over, people drinking water on the base. And now they're like, sorry, if you got leukemia and you were at Camp Lejeune between this year and this decade, you have a right to a settlement. The commercials are on the TV. So the military's always, had a bad habit of not caring about the environment. On top of their agendas to control weather as a weapon of war, they did it before, they'll do it again. I have 4 different FOIAs, Freedom of Information Act requests, from the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force, talking about specifically using carbon black dust to create/suppress contrail/cirrus. And they say, we want to be able to make clouds on demand to block out spy satellites in space and increase our nighttime operations. Meaning, like the Iraqi Republican Guard example I gave on Dell's show, block out the moonlight. We have night vision. Poor terrorists don't. You know what I mean? Now, all of a sudden, we have a distinct advantage. And of course, a lot of people are like, that's a really silly argument for making clouds. I didn't say that. Dr. Arnold A. Barnes Jr. from the United States Air Force Phillips Labs said it after giving a presentation on owning the weather in 2025, saying that we could create drought or floods using carbon black dust. And here's some other things we could do, like create contrail cirrus on demand to block out. They also reference that the Russians created infrared defeating clouds. So not only does it block visual satellites, it even blocks infrared spectrum so that they can't see through the cloud's heat signatures on the battlefield. All of these are documented to be true, but none of this has anything to do with commercial aviation. So I have to, in my head, compartmentalize all of the bits of data, these data points that I'm gathering, and go, what's the big picture here? What's really going on with just the airlines? Now, the most common answer I get is commercial aviation has nothing to do with this. I watched your intro beforehand, and that you put up the other day, and you said that Kristen Megan was on your show. She said yes, contrails are real, and persistent contrails. She cut herself off, but she said persistent contrails. Kristen Megan is persistent contrails are real. When faced with a pilot and not in front of Alex Jones, the truth just readily flows out of people's mouths. And Dane Wigington says, this has nothing to do with commercial planes. I don't believe commercial planes are involved, but then shows pylon drains on an Airbus plane, which I actually have spoken to 2 different engine, commercial aviation maintenance operators to validate. I said, I heard that these things are called pylon drains. I've got this thing for the Airbus, schematic. What about like Boeing planes? Do they have pylon drains? Yes.
Yeah.
What are they for? They're for fuel leakages or oil leakages in the pylon. They don't want that stuff to build up there. If there's any kind of leakages, it's just emptied out the back. It's similar to like, and about this, if you have too much gas and you're going to land, you can only land at a certain weight. So they have what's called fuel air dumping. Is that correct, Graham?
That's correct on a lot of aircraft, but the Boeing 737 never had that. It didn't have to. But yeah, fuel air dumping. Long haul aircraft do have it because when they get airborne, they're going a long way. They've got a lot of fuel, and the landing weight must always be less than the maximum takeoff weight because of the inertia and the forces when the landing gear touches down. So if an aeroplane takes off from LA to go to Sydney, and they blow an engine and they have to go back and land in LA, they've got to dump a whole bunch of fuel that they would have burned en route in order to get back down to the maximum landing weight to land. So fuel dumping is a critical maneuver that's practiced a lot on long-haul aircraft in the simulator, because if you miscalculate, you can end up having no fuel. So there's a legitimate reason for fuel dumping valves to be fitted to an aircraft.
So, I've seen many videos where, people are literally shooting from inside, the plane itself, looking out the wing, and look at the chemtrail nozzle, and you can just see all the jet fuel shooting out the end of it. And I've tried to explain, over the years, that's called fuel air dumping.
Yeah.
It ain't glorious. It's definitely not good for the environment. I've read the material safety data sheets on JP8, Jet A, and Jet A1, all of which say the same thing: do not dump in water, but no toxicological assessments on aquatic life or anything have ever been done on any of the material safety data sheets I've ever read on this stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe they're just not curious enough.
Yeah.
Wonder why.
It doesn't
There
sound.
was an incident. There was an incident back in the late 50s where I think a super constellation was dumping fuel to come back off the coast of California, and they were doing it in a holding pattern. So they were going round in circles as they dumped their fuel, and they flew back through the vapor of the fuel they dumped.
For you
The
too,
airplane
John?
exploded.
Yeah.
So have we dropped out there?
You dropped a couple times. That one was a little longer than
Yeah.
usual.
Yeah, the internet's playing up. Yeah, so a super constellation dumping fuel off the California coast flew back through its own fuel vapor that it dumped, and it exploded. So as soon as it flew back into the cloud of fuel vapor that it dumped in the holding pattern. So yeah, it's a very tricky maneuver, and nobody wants to dump fuel, A, because of the cost, and B, because it is a pollutant.
Yeah, and I don't know. Actually, it was somebody else. Somebody had called me about this, and I was explaining fuel air dumping to them. And there was actually a case where when NATO switched over from JP4 to JP8, they had what was called a minimum safe altitude at which you could dump jet fuel. And they didn't calculate for the change from, when JP4 changed to JP8, the different type of fuel. They were dumping fuel in Fallon, Nevada, and it was basically hitting neighborhoods in liquid form. So they actually had to not only settle federal lawsuits over leukemia and thyroid disease and all these other acute illnesses that people got in Fallon, Nevada, they had to raise the minimum altitude at which, military, I believe it's F-40 JP8, could be safely dumped so that it would evaporate before it reached the ground. Now, just because it evaporates before it reaches the ground doesn't mean that it's not still a big chemical dump on your head. So would some people want to argue that, oh, well, then what you're saying is that the airline industry does dump chemicals on people? Yes, they do. And if they didn't, the plane would blow up. And all of this is the way, once you understand these things and you can explain them and you understand why they're happening and what the terminology is, then if you don't like fuel air dumping, do something about it. Say something about it, but don't just talk out of your arse because you don't know that what you're seeing on a TikTok video is somebody dumping fuel, which nobody wants to do because it's, like Graham said, it's expensive. It's poisonous, but you can't land the plane otherwise. Anyway, so
We're
when I
gonna
look
run
at
out of, I don't want to run out of time Jim, because we've got still a bit to cover.
Jim, would it be a fair assessment to say that I mean you're not disputing the fact that that there is some sort of chemical intervention? I mean, it sounds to me like what we're seeing is a normal phenomena that you would expect from the engineering process that's involved with burning fuel. It sounds to me like there's some questions about the the side effects, so to speak, from the burn of that fuel. I mean, there's nothing sinister going on per se. I mean, it's a case of, yes, probably needs to do a little bit more work in regards to what the side effects of that is. I mean, it sounds like almost like PFAS.
Yeah.
They were happy to
Forever chemicals, for those who don't know what he's talking about.
And now, you wouldn't use it, but, here we are. People are up at night, not hanging their washing out, thinking that, Qantas and Delta and everyone else is going around spraying people. I mean, it's not correct.
That's right. Do you mind if I share a screen real quick so I can show you something real quick?
Yeah, sure, mate. Go ahead.
Make sure I got the right thing up here, and then I'll do that. I opened way too many. Okay, there we go. So the number one question I get is they say, I remember blue skies. This has not always been this way. This is a relatively new phenomenon. That's disputed, obviously, by the newspaper articles, firsthand accounts, and all of that. Being sued in the 1970s doesn't matter. I, too, remember blue skies here in South Carolina. I don't remember seeing the kind of spraying, for lack of better words, that we're seeing today. And I don't think that it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So I think you actually have to enable
Yeah, I've just done it,
able to
mate.
do that.
Yeah, I've just done it.
Screen 3 share.
We got it.
All right. I just want people to ruminate a little bit on these numbers. This is number of flights performed globally from 2004 to 2022. In 2004, there were 23.8 million flights in a year. In 2019, there were 38.9 million flights per year. Then COVID hit. So of course you see that, but we're already back, 2023. These numbers weren't complete when this chart was done, but we were already back up to 34 million flights per year. So the point I'm trying to make is if you take this chart and you extrapolate it out, this is from 2019 to 2004, we're talking 15 years. So keep going 15 years back and back and back and back. The chart pretty much is going to look very similar to this. I'm going to get all that information. It's something I really want to work out the numbers so we can figure out annually how many pounds of chemicals and what chemicals are in there. And, like just a general, how many pounds, per year of chemicals are dropped. So I wanted to try to find something a little further back. In 1980, there were 0.8 billion passengers per year. In 1990, there were 1.2 billion passengers per year. In 2008, there were 2.5 billion passengers per year. Right at the height before COVID, 4.6 billion passengers per year. So from 1980, before the chemtrail conspiracy started in 1996, that's when 1996, 1997 were the first time that the word chemtrail ever came out of anybody's mouth. We went from 0.8 billion to 4.6 billion in the span of let's say 20, in about 39 years.
40 years. Yeah.
That's 4 times the number of people flying. That's doubling of the number of flights in 15 years. I think that these numbers alone should give people a better broad idea of how bad this problem actually is. Last night on my show on YouTube, well, now it's on everything. I used to only live stream to YouTube, so I'm gonna have to get out of the habit of saying that. I showed a video that my wife had found, where there's this dude who is basically flying to and from Canada and Washington State in the US, and it only cost him $150 a flight. So he basically had decided that it was cheaper to fly than rent an apartment. And that's the world we live in today.
Yeah,
He
that's the
wouldn't he
problem.
wouldn't even he wouldn't even get an apartment at the college he was going to. He would just fly back home to mama's house because it was cheaper than actually renting an apartment near the campus that he was going to. So why is it surprising that there were 4.3 billion passengers versus less than a billion in 1980? These kind of numbers, when you start to think about them and the output of chemicals, are the important part. That I really want to get to this before we go anywhere else. So the other big problem that people have is they don't really realize what they're looking at. Edgar Allan Poe said very famously, believe none of what you hear and half of what you see.
Yep.
So you might want to be able to do a little validation yourself. If you're very serious about this topic, I suggest you get one of these. And this is a Nikon P900, Coolpix P900. And what's really cool about the Coolpix is this little feature right here. It's got a 83 times optical zoom on it. So when you point this sucker at a plane, you can read its tail. Guaranteed. And shoot video. All those videos you've seen that are close-ups, almost 90% of them come from this camera right here. I've done this myself. And I promise you, I'm not just speaking from watching other people's YouTubes. I go out in my backyard, I look up, I see a plane. I check flight radar. It isn't there. I go to ADSB Exchange, globe.adsb Exchange. I check out the altitude. I go to look at radiosonde data. I look at what the temperature is at the altitude that the plane is flying at. I see two planes flying which appear to be at the same altitude. They're more than 10,000 feet apart.
Yep.
People don't want to believe this kind of stuff. They just want to believe their lying eyes because they're all of a sudden they're human telescopes that are able to accurately calculate the flight, the altitude of planes flying at. So when you look at what's called the Appleman-Schmidt criteria, the Appleman chart, and you go and you compare that to radiosonde data. Radiosondes are where weathermen take balloons, they throw them out in the air, go up into altitude. It's measured in millibars going all the way up. And you see a dew point depression and a temperature line. They're going to be like this. And as they go up, there at some point, they're going to get like this. And then they're going to diverge again. Right about here is where contrail persistence occurs. This is called an ice supersaturated region.
Yep.
Generally speaking, it's where the temperature and the dew point depression are within about 5 degrees Celsius of each other.
Yep.
So the divergence is usually where you see the tropopause. That's where the stratosphere begins.
Yep.
So what I would challenge anybody who's a contrail not believer to do is buy yourself a camera, or you don't even need the camera, but it's fun to have it. But go out and track the flight. Learn how to read radiosonde data. It's not that hard. It won't take you very long. I'm making an app for it right now. We're going to make it real easy for you. And the reason I want you to do this is because I want you to be able to tell for yourself, is it a chemtrail or a contrail according to your definition? If it's in, let's say, 32,000 to 40,000 feet, and the radiosonde data says that the dew point depression and the temperature are within about 5 degrees of each other, guess what? You're going to get big, fat contrails that are probably going to persist because there's enough water vapor there already. It's super cooled. And once it meets a hot stream of freaking carbon black or soot, it has something to condense on. And once that occurs, it's going to fan out It's no longer going to be a contrail, whether you like it or not. It's going to be a cirrus cloud. And for those who can't spell that, Cirrus, cirrus. Not like seriously, cirrus. So once a cirrus cloud is formed, it's going to blanket the sky and it's going to persist and it's going to typically travel, like here in the United States. A typical cirrus cloud created by a plane in a nice supersaturated region could persist as long as about 14 hours, which is generally long enough to travel over 10 to 12, 15 states. So some of the white haze you're seeing in the sky, which is just cirrus clouds at this point, they're metal clouds. They're filled with all kinds of toxic metals.
Yep.
If you look at the material safety data sheets on any of the additives like metal deactivator, anti-static dissipator, biocides like biobor, they kill the bugs in the jet fuel tank. All of these chemicals, almost all of them, will either say CERCLA or Sera 313. Sera 313 means cancer causing chemical. So when you read the material safety data sheets for all of these things, they're highly, highly, highly toxic. Just naphtha is toxic. And most of it is naphtha.
Jim, I want to jump in for a second. A lot of
Go right ahead.
Wigington and others make outrageous claims about chemtrails being turned on and off. I have explained this ad nauseum. Give us your version of why chemtrails seem to switch on and off in the sky.
I don't have a great answer, and I'm going to tell you why. Because Mick West, who is the top debunker on the planet, who I debated, and we had a semantic war. I won it hands down. It was great. It's phenomenal. You should watch it. You'd probably laugh your ass off at it. But Mick West got with Ken Caldera on that geoengineering group that I was debating the geoengineers in. It's a Google group called Geoengineering. It's run by Andrew Lockley. If you go to climateviewer.substack.com, you can scroll down on my recommended section and see geoengineering updates. That's Andrew Lockley's actual page. You can see a bunch of Mick West posts, like him and Ken Caldera are arguing over what a geoengineered sky would look like and how blue or white it would be. But they came up with this thing called the SLAP experiment. Have you guys heard about this?
No.
Secret large scale aerial spraying, aerial program. Secret large scale aerial program, SLAP. And they basically did a poll of 100 climate scientists, meteorologists, and all this stuff. Have you ever seen elevated levels of aluminum in water or soil samples? Out of 100, one guy said, yes, highly elevated. Okay. So pretty much across the board, most of the questions were very similar answers. But when it came to why do we have breaks in the contrails, the group of 100 scientists, their answers varied extremely wide. Some of them range from gravity waves. So like Lee wave induced clouds. Have you ever seen roll clouds where, basically gravity waves cause ridges in the clouds?
Lenticular
That's
cloud.
one. Yeah. So lenticular. Thank you very much. So that's one excuse they gave. Another excuse they gave was updrafts, downdrafts. Just wake vortices. They gave many different excuses, none of which I found to be credible. What would you say the answer to that is?
I'm glad you asked me because to try and give our passengers the smoothest possible ride, we're always monitoring what's going on in front of us, what's happening to the temperature gauge on the aircraft, the outside air temperature gauge. We would never fly in someone else's condensation trail because the wake turbulence would make it rough.
Right.
When you get and also you're looking for different winds. So you want to go to your destination with a tailwind and you want to come home with a tailwind, obviously. What you realize is as you climb through the atmosphere, the wind changes direction rapidly, speed rapidly. It's coming from all over the place. And as you go up, and then you get into a jet stream, which is a core of wind that flows between pressure systems, and that's a beautiful thing to be in if it's behind you, but it's a horrible thing to be in if it's in front of you. But what I'm describing is an atmosphere that collides with itself, wind this way, wind that way. They brush together. It causes a turbulent roll. It causes a wave in the atmosphere. And those waves are troughs and peaks that roll gently as these air masses collide. And
that's right.
And in the peak, you might have a certain temperature and vapor content which fits into that 5-degree layer that you're talking about. And you fly in and out of those like a boat going through waves on a river. And so
that's the exact analogy I was getting ready to make. Like when you come on a tributary into the main part of the river and you see the river is going this way, and then I remember this from Boy Scouts. I was in a canoe, and all of a sudden the water starts to really pick up speed because now we're being drawn into the main river, and you can see that rolling of the water right there where they come and combine. And people don't think of the sky as a river. They say, but why are there grids in the sky? And I'm like, because the plane actually flew here, and then the wind blew it, and then it flew here, and then the wind blew it, and then it flew here. The plane's in the same point. I said, if you take your finger and you literally look up, put your finger right on there. And if you're in a high traffic area, you can hold your finger there long enough, and another plane will fly right over and touch your fingertip.
Exactly right.
And people don't understand that.
We pass over the same geographic point in the root network structure, and the wind, which is in the southern hemisphere, always prevails at high altitude from west to east, and in the northern from east to west. That wind, which sometimes is up around 150 nautical miles per hour, is moving those trails along and forming railway tracks. Then if you get someone flying across that on a route that's, say, going on the east coast of Australia, most routes are going north-south. Then you get aircraft flying from New Zealand across the east coast of Australia going to Asia or to Western Australia. You get a tic-tac-toe effect. And so you see this grid network building.
It's the same thing I try to tell you. If like you're in Sacramento and you got a plane flying from, let's say, Detroit down to LA, and another flight that's going from LA up to Seattle, Washington, one's going north-south, the other one's coming east-west, and all you're going to see is grids everywhere along that route. But then, of course, people go, no, but I've seen it myself. These are not marked planes. And I keep going, I don't believe you. Like, I'm just at this point, I'm such a skeptic that unless you got one of these and you can, show me your flight data, like you actually took the time to go track the flight that you're talking about, and you know what altitude it was at, don't come at me sideways out your mouth telling me that thing was spraying chemicals out of a pump, a pipe, a bottle, or any of that crap, because I want somebody who can say, I know that, yes, contrails do occur. I know that persistent contrails do occur. I know that they turn into cirrus clouds, but I saw a plane at 12,000 feet leaving ropes in the sky. You did? Show me the flight data on that. I want to see your video. I want to see the flight information, which you should be able to record. You can do it at the same time because you can get a flight tracker on your phone. Don't be lazy, people that are watching this that are hating. Don't be lazy. Get a phone, get a P900. They're cheap now because when I bought this thing, it was expensive. It's got to be cheap now. You can get a used one. It don't have to be perfect. Take a video of the thing, zoom out, go to your flight tracker, zoom in, click on the plane, and then record it. Okay, now we know what plane you actually recorded, and somebody out there can validate that you actually saw a real ass chemtrail, because no, planes don't create persistent contrails at 12,000 feet. That does not occur. Except the stratosphere is not at the same height everywhere in the world.
Yep.
So at the equator, it's roughly 40 to 42,000 feet. That's where the tropopause typically is. As you get closer to Canada, And of course, it's going to be different for you guys. I don't have a good example, localized for you. That's why we're making an app right now so we can actually visualize. And I'm coming to the stratosphere point to make a point. So in Canada, it can be as low as like 32,000 feet. So now all of a sudden, and one time Jeff Matiska, my friend, he's a former U.S. Navy meteorologist. He showed me a radio sign reading where the tropopause was at 25,000 feet.
Yep.
That's rare, but that's real.
Yep.
So you could actually have a highly compressed atmosphere in that area where there's a lot of relative humidity in a very short distance, far below where you normally would have contrail persistence. But here's the problem with all of this that nobody's talking about, and we haven't even really touched on it at all yet. What do geoengineers want to do? They don't want to create clouds unless you're talking about marine cloud brightening. It's very rarely ever even discussed. In fact, I'm going to bring this up before let me share my third screen here again and bring this up real quick. Because I know that you guys haven't seen this, so why not? Let's have some fun.
Yeah.
So this is called Geoengineering with Sulfur, Jet Fuel, and Commercial Aviation. Now, there have been many scientists who've talked about altering jet fuel composition for the express purpose of geoengineering. The most cited one is stratospheric Welsbach seeding for global reduction of global warming. One exemplary technique may be via the jet fuel, as suggested by prior work regarding metallic particles. This was in 1991, 98. Direct sulfuric acid detection and exhaust plume by Ulrich Schumann. The measurements show how sulfuric acid signatures for the case when sulfuric acid was injected directly into the jet exhaust, or when the sulfur was provided to the engine with the fuel. So it's called fuel doping. This is another sulfur experiment done by Ulrich Schumann, sulfur 1 through 7. Albedo enhancement by stratospheric sulfur injections. This was the famous Nobel Prize winning author that wrote that crap. But anyway, William Cotton at the Weather Modification Conference in 2008 said, use commuter aircraft with their jet fuels doped with aerosol generators. You can actually click that. It'll go straight to it. I mean, if there wasn't a freaking ad in the way. But you can actually see his entire presentation, and where it came from right here on the American Meteorological Society's website. But yes, that's exactly what he says.
Yep.
Is this thing moving? What's it doing? Anyway, it's there. I don't know why. I think YouTube's decided to take a crap on me so it can just ruin my show. Watch it later. You know where to find this. The point is, he says all this stuff, but there's a whole bunch of these. A potential delivery mechanism for seeding materials already in place. The airline industry, modification of cirrus clouds to reduce global warming. Yep. Dissolved or suspended in their jet fuel and later burned with the fuel. Injected into the hot engine exhaust. So those are two examples of all these go to sulfur. Addition of sulfur to the fuel. Attachment of a nozzle to release sulfur from its own tank within the plane. So I'm following both simultaneously, and then you get a hater over here says stratospheric passenger flights are likely inefficient geoengineering strategy. But then they did the access flights, alternative fuel effects on contrail and cruise emissions, where they used some biofuels for contrail control that made the contrails go away, less particulate emission, less black carbon, but they also tested JP8 fuel doped with sulfur. Why would they do that? So the Academy of Finland, FICA's COOL project. Another technique examined was the use of commercial passenger aircraft flying at high altitudes to inject sulfate aerosols emitted by aviation into the stratosphere.
Yep.
So this is the one that is the craziest by far, and this is the most recent one that I, added to this. I got way more that I could add to this. Apply high fuel sulfur content at aviation cruise altitudes combined with ultra low sulfur jet fuel at lower altitudes reduce aviation induced mortality and increased negative RE compared to the baseline aviation scenario. What they are basically saying here is we can produce less soot over, airports and kill less people. But then when we get to altitude, switch to high sulfur fuels to inject sulfur into the stratosphere. Going back to what I said about the stratosphere is not always at the same place at the same time. The thing that nobody's talking about is when aircraft are flying in the stratosphere, meaning not in the troposphere, they are above the tropopause, they are in the stratosphere, they will not create clouds, but they will be achieving the goal of geoengineers, which is to do stratospheric aerosol injection. Every bit of the aerosols, the exhaust, goes directly into there. So they actually talk about the ice supersaturated air, or ISSRs, ice supersaturated regions, and two fuels in one, two different jet fuels in one plane for contrail control. They even say how they would do that with the control unit and method of controlling the supply of a vehicle with multiple fuels through the jet fuel electronic control unit. Meaning, if somebody were to load one tank full of sulfur doped fuel, that it could be remotely switched without you even having knowledge of it at this point. Now, I know that this is a relatively new idea, being that this is a patent application in 2011. But regardless, these are all real things being discussed. What people don't realize is when Ulrich Schumann is saying things, I didn't mean to pop that doing new window. When he's telling, the ICAO that we want to make less warming, more cooling contrails, and then comes up with a way to predict where they are, this is what was not in the video with Del Bigtree. And then I asked Rangasai Halthori about it, and he said, we would like to have more contrail-induced cirrus clouds during the day and none during the night.
Yeah.
After I did the Del Bigtree interview, somebody jumped in my chat and said, Jim, you're going to freak out when you see this, but I want you to see this. And this is from the British Aeronautical Society. So we'll go to that real quick just so you can see it. Royal Aeronautical Society. Easy does it for greener skies. And this is what they actually said. Could contrails actually help cool the planet? And this is the slide. And you cannot make this one up. Avoid warming contrails by avoiding contrail forming regions, ice supersaturated regions, or create cooling contrails by intentionally flying into ice supersaturated regions. The contrail avoidance group at the first meeting was split over forming cooling contrails. Is this geoengineering? Decide to sidestep the issue and form a governance subgroup. Recent work in the margins suggests cooling contrails are worth investigating. So when you see that the Greener by Design contrail avoidance group at the Royal Aeronautical Society is talking about routing flights intentionally to not create clouds at nighttime, but intentionally create clouds during the day, that by definition is geoengineering. Hell, they said it right here on their own slide at their own meeting. I didn't have this slide when I gave my presentation to Del Bigtree. And the person who sent it to me hadn't seen the interview because we recorded it on January 22nd and it didn't come out till March something. So when he gave this to me, I was like, why couldn't I have had? I mean, I knew I was right. I knew I was right when I was talking about the goal of creating clouds by day, none by night because of carbon credits. But this is like the most concrete evidence that Ulrich Schumann and Dr. Angus I. Halthori were not just, blowing smoke in the wind when they came up with this idea. They're taking it very seriously. And I have the original Yeah, I backed all this up on archive.org. I have this backed up locally on my flash drive. You can't take it down, guys. There's no takebacks on the internet. Um, but this is the kind of thing that nobody's talking about. And they even have this thing called predictive real-time emissions technologies for reducing aircraft induced lines in the sky, pre-trails. And this involves using things like Google AI, which is already working with American Airlines on routing flights around ice supersaturated regions. So, long story short, is this actually geoengineering? That, by definition, would be geoengineering. It would be intentionally creating clouds.
Yep.
Because now you know how they form, you know where they form, using artificial intelligence to accurately predict, what's the trade-off? How much jet fuel are you going to have to burn to avoid making clouds? And what impact on the climate, according to their global warming ideology model, is it worth it? And the whole purpose being that the airline is trying to greenwash their poisonous fuel systems because they've got to buy time until they can come up with Teslas in the sky. And they know that that's 20 to 40 years out. I mean, you can't even put a freaking lithium ion battery on a plane without, having a huge sticker on the side, warning, risk of fire, do not fly this. I bought a cell phone from Amazon and went to ship it back. And of course they were like, put this label on it, says, do not fly this, phone, in the cargo bay. And we all know why. So there's a lot of problems that they're going to have to deal with. And when they've got the climate cult on their ass about their carbon footprint, and then they go and realize that contrail-induced cirrus clouds actually trap heat at night, according to them, because it actually makes a lot of sense because greenhouse gases don't actually hold heat. Water vapor holds heat. We all know that. But what's really going on, and I've got a great little actual animation picture here that kind of shows it. This is the graphic that I drew for it to kind of show people how this works. Geoengineering solar radiation management is about reflecting sunlight away. But cirrus cloud thinning, which is talked about in the Biden solar radiation modification report, cirrus cloud thinning is the idea that while they're telling everybody it's just condensation trails and it's nothing to worry about, nothing to see here, it's just water vapor, they're actually talking about doing Earth radiation management or dealing with outgoing long-wave solar radiation, heat trapped at the ground by metal ice clouds. So they want to melt them away. This is called cirrus cloud seeding or cirrus cloud thinning. So now we've got a couple different things going on here. We've got people talking about not flying the planes to make clouds at night, or if the clouds do persist into the night, using chemicals like bismuth triiodide to melt those clouds away. All of this, everything that I'm talking about right now, is out in the open and is commercial aviation. I'm not talking about, what the CIA's up to, because the CIA was behind Operation Popeye. The CIA was behind killing Castro's sugar crops by making it rain in the Gulf of Mexico, not on Cuba. The CIA, John Brennan, at the Council on Foreign Relations said, I think geoengineering is a great idea and we should look into this. By the way, the CIA also funded the National Science Foundation studies on what they called climate intervention. So geoengineering was rebranded to climate engineering, was rebranded to climate intervention. And now you've got the head of the CIA going, hey, let's fund this. And by the way, let's call up a geoengineer and ask him if some country was geoengineering over America, would we know about it? And Alan Robach, doctor of geoengineering that he is, said, at the same time, I felt like the CIA was asking me, if we geoengineered over some other country, would they know about it?
Yeah.
And the answer is unequivocally no. The reason why is because we cannot tell the difference between man-made cirrus clouds and natural cirrus clouds. And we certainly can't tell the difference between what real geoengineering looks like and clouds, because the most of the public seems to be in the Dane Wigington camp of all geoengineering is the white lines that we see. And Graham Hood's part of the geoengineering Illuminati making clouds. That's not what any geoengineer ever talked about. It is some of what they're talking about here, but they're not even talking about it in the papers I just read to you. They're talking about getting sulfur into the stratosphere. So if you go to globe.adsbexchange.com and you look right now, you're going to see that almost all of the flights that are in the stratosphere right now are private jets. And then there's a lot of other planes that are very close to it, which are your long haul flights, especially over the Arctic. All of those are in the stratosphere. So what has the buildup of all of these chemicals in the upper atmosphere led to? Has that led to the problem that we're seeing today? I've shown you a couple things. The vast number of increases of flights over the years. The changes in chemical composition, the idea is to add sulfur to jet fuel. There is a high sulfur content in jet fuel. Isn't it ironic that, every 18-wheeler tractor trailer, you know what I mean, that their diesel fuel was limited to have a certain sulfur emission, that the shipping industry, which used to run on bunker fuel, which was a high sulfur fuel that made ship tracks, they banned that too. Nobody has talked about the sulfur content of jet aircraft fuel. It's just not even discussed.
Wow.
That's the $1 million question that nobody's willing to talk about, especially when geoengineers like David Key say, if we do a geoengineering program like what I'm thinking about doing, put about 1 million tons of sulfur into the atmosphere, you would likely kill many tens of thousands of people. And you did the math yourself. You did 100,000 tons, which is 200 million pounds of kerosene, just your plane. We're well above what David Keith was talking about already.
Yeah.
And sulfur coming out of jet fuel, ending up in the stratosphere. I'm going to leave one last thing I'm going to share on the screen, and we're just going to talk it out from there. But I'd feel remiss if I did not share this one. This is the proof positive that geoengineering is occurring, whether they like it or not. So on climateviewer.com/cirrus clouds matter. Yes, it's a play on word, like Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. So I'd put cirrus clouds matter. I have 2 PowerPoint presentations. You can download them. They cover a lot of what I'm already talking about, but metals detected in jet exhaust. Once you realize that these are the metals, this is the scientific paper where they did the sniffing right behind the jet to, not just test the jet fuel, but actually burn it on a tarmac and see what comes out the butt end of the plane farts. And these are the most, all of these metals were internally mixed with soot particles. This is the important part that I want everybody to take away from this. The most abundant metals in the exhaust were chromium, iron, molybdenum, sodium, calcium, aluminum, vanadium, aluminum, and then there's a little semicolon here. Vanadium, barium, cobalt, copper, nickel, lead, magnesium, manganese, silicon, titanium, zirconium were also detected. So these were abundant, okay? Very abundant chemicals found. Most people don't even know that calcium's a freaking metal. But calcium carbonate happens to be the number one talked about, other than sulfur, chemical that geoengineers want to use. So calcium and aluminum definitely in plentiful. Why does this matter? Because the Indian Space Organization said that they found evidence of such particles existing 18 kilometers in the stratosphere, and they're 10,000 per cubic centimeter. So if all of those metals are in the soot, and the Indian Space Organization said that the soot particles, given the shape and location of these particles, they argue it could only derive from emissions from aviation fuel. Why? Because the soot was spherical. And that only happens from planes. Normally they're agglomerates, they're grape-like, they're called a ceniform, but because they're spherical and they found them at that altitude, all of the metals and all the soot that they found 10,000 per cubic centimeter in the stratosphere. I'm bringing this up because I want to make it abundantly clear that for the last 60 years, any plane that has flown even close to the stratosphere has been doing stratospheric aerosol injection. When you look up at the sky above you and it's blue, and you look at the horizon and it's milky white, that is geoengineering. That is solar radiation management. That is stratospheric aerosol injection. That is what Bill Gates and David Keith and Ken Caldera and all these individuals have been talking about doing all this time, not creating clouds. The fact that I just showed you that they also want to use clouds is just another icing on the cake. Like you mentioned with the Marine Cloud Brightening Project, they've done away with bunker fuel. So ship tracks have disappeared. They're actually writing a letter to the International Maritime Organization right now. They have got a chain letter that's signed by geoengineers to please allow them to use bunker fuel again because we need it because it cools the ocean. Even though it's poisonous, even though it kills people, they want to bring it back because they love sulfur because volcanoes. So all this has to do with the Mount Pinatubo eruption. They saw it cooled the planet, and they said, well, if volcanoes can cool the planet, we can cool the planet. How did the volcano do it? They put sulfur into the upper atmosphere. Why does it matter? Because what lasts only 2 weeks to 2 months in the troposphere, because it rains out in acid rain, it lasts 2 months, anywhere from like, let's say 2 months to 2 years in the stratosphere, because it's much more stable and it takes much longer for it to fall out. So any of the aerosols building up in the stratosphere, they stay there much longer. And when you look at that chart that I showed you, 2004, 23 million, 2019, 39 million flights per year. That number is only going to go up every year.
Yep. Unless
somebody starts doing something about it. And I'm not saying that I'm trying to like parrot AOC, and the WEF. I'm saying because it is poisoning our planet. It is changing weather on a worldwide basis. And people are going batshit crazy over lines in the sky while the scientists try to play it off at like it's no big deal, while at the same time doing biofuels for contrail control, talking about sulfur doping fuel, talking about routing flights on purpose to make clouds on demand. And all of it's building up in the stratosphere. So when you don't see that's why I said to, Dell, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
Because if you complain so much about the clouds that all they do is say, fine, we'll get rid of the freaking clouds. Fine. They'll dump antifreeze out the back of a plane and there won't be any clouds, but now it'll be even worse. So I don't know what the solution is. I don't have a solution for this large of a pollution problem. When somebody came to me recently and said, look, we want to sue over chemtrails, we want to stop the geoengineer program, I said, let's talk about it. I talked to her lawyer. Her lawyer was going to file a lawsuit. And when we were talking about the lawsuit, I said, well, are you ready to sue the entire airline industry? Are you ready to take on the International Civil Aviation Organization? Are you ready to take on NATO? Because at the end of the day, the NATO Pipeline Committee sets the standards for, the military grade fuel standards for all jet flights. The ASTM follows those regulations, obviously, because it's cost beneficial for them. So commercial jet fuel mimics what NATO sets out as guidelines because they want to be able to sell to NATO, because guess what? Military burns a lot of jet fuel too. So they're very similar, and it's head up by the NATO Pipeline Committee. So unless you're willing to take on the NATO Pipeline Committee and all of NATO and change them, plus change the entire airline industry as a whole, you're going to be fighting them 10 to 20 years. And by the time it actually makes it to court, they'll have invented the freaking Tesla airplane. Does that make sense? That's how
Absolutely.
big, that's how big I see this problem. I don't know that maybe I'm crazy, but I'm looking at the evidence. I'm looking at the projections. I'm looking at their own internal documents on how they can get out of this carbon, footprint problem they have. And the only way they can do it was carbon credits and carbon offsets by saying, hey, look, we're going to stop making warming contrails. We'll make cooling contrails. And then you can ignore our CO2 emissions because we're helping to cool the planet. That's a real conspiracy. I mean, that is a real ass conspiracy. You can look it up. It's right there in the headlines. Once you go looking for it, you can't unsee it.
Yep. Yep.
So I go back to, I think a lot of this stuff, from the nanobots to the Morgellons to the depopulation, is it depopulation? It very well might as well be, because as David Keith put it, if you put 1 million tons a year of sulfur into the atmosphere, you'll kill many tens of thousands of people. You want me to bring up my website from 2017, where there were major news articles writing that more than 10,000 people a year die from airplane pollution? Because there's many of those articles. They're right out there. But, people don't want to look at it like that. They don't want to, just, you, like we said off air, no amount of evidence can ever convince an idiot. And I'm not saying that if you don't believe me, you're an idiot. I'm saying that no amount of evidence can change your mind if your mind's already made up. And the lawyer says to the judge, he's like, I don't understand it, man. I went in there and I did, all my evidence was perfect. I explained it great. Judge, what did I do wrong? And he said, your first mistake was trying to convince people whose minds were already made up. And I think that's where we are with this one. So
well, I think that's probably where we need to wind this up. We could go on all day. It's been fascinating listening to you, Jim, because your insights are spot on, absolutely spot on. You've not said anything that I personally disagree with. We are being distracted. We are being distracted. Our eyes are being taken off the real agenda, and that's what's really important. Johnny, we've had Shane Murdoch, a senior captain with Virgin. We've had Squadron Leader Derek Fox, who was chief pilot of Tiger Airways. We've all been involved in this mandate and COVID rubbish, trying to sort something out. And those gentlemen agree with us that there's something going on and anything's on the table. Something's not right. There's a rat in the cheese factory and we can smell it. So you got to find.
Well, I think that's right, Hoodie. I think, people are right to be suspicious about what's going on out there. I mean, the reality is it's not as it seems. I mean, there's obviously issues with regard to geoengineering, but they're being hidden. People aren't aware of it. It's not people purposely running around creating issues. It's being done, essentially in other means as a byproduct, and it's obviously causing a great deal of problems. I mean, the thing that was alarming to me was that stat that Jim threw up there on the aircraft movements and the people movements in aviation. I mean, it just shows you what a juggernaut they are. I mean, during the 1 in 100 pandemic that was supposed to be, wipe out the world, the aeroplane movements really were not that reduced when you think that, people are flying around the world spreading disease, allegedly. I mean, how on the earth did you have one aeroplane movement other than to medevac someone from somewhere? I mean, how many movements was there, Jim? There was 20 plus on that graph. It's horrendous.
Yeah, at the height of the pandemic.
That was kind of shocking that it dropped from almost 40 million, but there were still 16.9 million in 2020. But that's also, including shipments. So like you say, like shipping medical supplies, delivering Amazon. Like Amazon had a booming year because guess what? Nobody was allowed to go to their local Walmart to buy anything or were scared to. So even during that time, I'm seeing right here, 2020, there was 1.9 billion passengers in 2020. versus 4.6 the year before. So there were still 2 billion people flying around, where this chart ends. And of course, I'm going to double verify. Don't trust any of the numbers I just gave you, because I was, only been able to pull these up from like 3 different sources so far. I'm going to dig and dig and dig till I can get back to the beginning of when we started flying, because I want to know, when was the first high bypass engine flown? When did they become prevalent? I still have many questions that I want answers to. So that I'm fed. Now that you bastards pulled me into this, I'm not going to stop until I know every single answer about it. That's the type of person I am.
Yeah.
But the more I dig into it, it's not like a confirmation bias kind of thing. Because I challenge people all the time. I'm like, show me your stuff. You show me, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. If you can prove me wrong, please do, because I don't want to live a life that's a lie. And I believe that I'm being more honest with myself and honest with you than anybody else, because I'm willing to tell you, I'm not certain that those are the real numbers. I just found them on, from organizations that track this stuff. I want to know how many different data sets they have on all this stuff and try to piece the puzzle together, because I think that the biggest problem, the reason why there's a chemtrail conspiracy, and I hold to this just as my gut level feeling. The increase of air traffic combined with the advent of the internet and the cell phone is why we all have a collective Mandela effect going on. And it's not like that there never was contrails that turned into cirrus clouds. That clearly occurred. I think they have rapidly increased since 1996 because of the increase in traffic, but also there's more visibility and people pissed off about it because there's so many people that have a video camera in their hand at all times. So that's what's making this special today, is that it's more visible than ever, whereas there weren't the ability to just instantly share a video of your sky with everybody on the planet instantaneously. So of course people are going to be concerned. When I see videos of Europe or the UK, like it never looks that bad where I'm at, but then I go and I look at their satellite view or an infrared, or I look at the Gozer or the Japanese Himawari 8, and I'm like, wow, like I thought I had it bad here. You should see that place right now. I can only imagine what it looks like. I think that just, the availability of data today and the ability for people to share their terrifying skies is why, plus the narrative that none of these are contrails, which is purveyed by Dane Wigington and Russ Tanner. If it weren't for them saying there's no such thing as contrails,
That's the point.
there would probably be action on this. Like, you could get people to do something about it, because clearly, if people care about climate change, this is the most visible climate change there is. In fact, it's the only visible climate change there is. It's happening over your house. If you care about it, learn about it. Don't just point fingers. Don't blame, the pilots. Don't blame everybody but yourself. If you're flying for $150 instead of renting a freaking house like the kid I just saw earlier, you're part of the problem.
Exactly.
Opt out.
Exactly.
Opt out.
I'm going to break this into 2 parts because we want everyone to watch this stuff, but it's been really enlightening, and I am in total agreement with everything you said. Everything you said has me feeling more and more convinced of your position, because of what I know to be true as well. Everything have felt in my gut in aviation blends beautifully into what you're saying. So what we want to say to everybody out there, we're not trying to tell you how to think, but if you're going to make comments, at least do your research and think it through. And there are 2 sides to every story. And whatever you end up believing after this is totally your freedom of choice to do so. But for goodness sake, be careful what you wish for. People praying for passenger aircraft to collide in the sky is not the solution. And so we've got to be really, really careful. I want to close this off with a prayer. We talked about that earlier, Jim, if you don't mind.
I do not.
Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, please grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, and taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as we would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if we surrender to your will, so that we may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. In Jesus' name, amen. This is all about fear, false evidence appearing real. And if you're smitten with fear, you are a sitting duck for those who wish to control you. Get rid of the fear, focus on what you can fix, and for goodness sake, start loving each other. Because without that, we're not going to get anywhere. Jim, we want to thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. We know that you're in a bit of pain. We appreciate your perspective. Thank you for your courage, and most of all, thank you for your incredible research. And I don't want to focus on this because it's not in our lane. I've got to be honest, but we'd love people to go to your website, which is climateviewer.com, and all the gear there. It's a fantastic website. It's filled with facts, and it's filled with credibility. And I think it's great. I'm going to delve into that myself. Johnny, any final comment?
No, I think the case has been put, and people can do their own background and information. That's what we encourage people to do. I'm not a big believer in climate change. I think it's all a lot of rubbish, but people can have their own view. It's up to them.
Yeah, exactly right. And
I'm in that camp.
Yeah, we know that we're being fooled. A lot of very wealthy people are going to get even richer at our expense over this nonsense. You know what? The climate's been changing ever since there was a climate. Let's be honest. So that's it, I reckon. Let's get on with this and let's see where it leads. Johnny, you've often been heard to say,
you just couldn't make this stuff up.
You couldn't make this stuff up. And stay out of the trees, everybody. Go and look at Jim's website. It's very illuminating. And thank you so much, Jim, for your time and your courage.
I appreciate you guys having me on here. And I want to reiterate what Graham said. Don't trust me. I'm just a guy in Sumter, South Carolina who's nosy and remembers everything he reads. I could be wrong. And the day we all agree is the day we could all be wrong. So you take this and at least consider, does this resonate with you? If it does, look more into it. If you think I'm a paid actor shill, I don't care. It doesn't affect my life.
I see.
But at least be real with yourself and honest. If you're addicted to fear, admit it to yourself, own it, and enjoy your life. But I do not want to be addicted to fear. I want to know the truth, no matter how painful it is, and act on it. Because fear is a mind killer, and fear causes people to not be able to be activists. And that's why you will never see any action on this at all if your mind is blinded by fear.
Well, we brought you Dane Wigington's explanations. We've given you Jim Lee's explanations, and you can make up your own minds. We've covered this from top to bottom and from back to front. So avoid the fear, stay strong, and let's get on with life. We've got a lot to do. While we're looking at clouds, they're vaccinating our children. There's a lot going on that we've got to focus on that we can actually affect change in. God bless you, everybody. Thanks for watching Club Grubbery. And now it's back to ending mandates and getting kids safe. God bless you and bye for now.
If this video resonates with you, leave me a comment because I love hearing from y'all. First time here, be sure to subscribe and click the bell. Yeah! Remember, it would be impossible for me to do this without your support, so please join my Patreon or buy me a coffee on PayPal. And always, attack ideas, not people.